Hey everybody, tonight's video is called God's Wrath Against Nations, and tonight we continue our pass-through study here in the book of Isaiah, where we're going to be looking at the indignation of the Lord against all the nations. And so we are in Isaiah chapter 34 tonight, and it's going to be a little bit on the long side once again on this video. And Isaiah 34 verse 1 through 4 says, "Come near, you nations, to hear and heed, you people. Let the earth hear, and all that is in it, the world and all things that come forth from it. For the indignation of the Lord is against all nations, and his fury against all their armies. He has utterly destroyed them. He has given them over to slaughter. And also their slain shall be thrown out. Their stench shall arise from their corpses. And the mountains shall be melted with their blood. All the host of heaven shall be dissolved, and the heavens shall be rolled up like a scroll. All their hosts shall fall down, as a leaf falls from the vine, and as fruit fallen from a fig tree." So Isaiah, he invited the nations to approach to hear God's sentence of judgment against them. We get like a setting of like a courtroom on sentencing day. And those who oppose the Lord will face his judgment, we see in verse 2. And in verse 3, exposure for a prolonged time of dead corpses was and is depositive and disgraceful. And the blood of the slain filled the land. And it's the images of the day of the Lord on earth. And in verse 4, not even the heavens are to escape the effects of God's wrath. And Revelation affirms the future fulfillment of this prophecy during Daniel's 70th week. And the Lord stretched out the heavens at creation, and in the end, we see he's going to roll them up. So in the immediate context, Isaiah continues the thought of the coming judgment on the Assyrians here, but there's a far future second double prophecy in this, and for premillennialists, they believe its far fulfillment is on the nations during the Great Tribulation period. And verse 5 through 7 says, "For my sword shall be bathed in heaven. Indeed, it shall come down on Edom, and on the people of my curse for judgment. The sword of the Lord is filled with blood. It is made overflowing with fatness, with the blood of the lambs and goats, and with the fat of the kidneys of rams. For the Lord has sacrificed in Bozrah, and a great slaughter in the land of Edom. The wild oxen shall come down with them, and the young bulls with the mighty bulls. Their land shall be soaked with blood, and their dust saturated with fatness." So the prophet selects Edom as a representative for the rest of the nations. And people of my curse is another way of devoted people. But the expression has a negative implication stemming from their involuntary devotion to God. And these nations referred to as Edom reject or oppose God's people, as we also find later in Isaiah 63 verse 1 through 6, Ezekiel 35, and Obadiah verse 10 through 14. And in verse 6, Bozrah is a chief city of Edom, located approximately 20 miles southeast of the southern end of the Dead Sea. And since the nations hadn't repented and obeyed God's way for sacrifices for sins, they became the sacrificial penalty for their own sins. And don't forget the sacrificial animals in some Old Testament passage take place of the sinful people in receiving the punishment of death. And in the absence of a sacrifice for the nations, the people themselves must die for their sins. And praise God that goats were sacrificed rather than monkeys. And I just want to make that clear. And in verse 7, mighty bulls referred to the Edomite leaders. And the King James Version translates wild oxen as unicorns. And there's one way that, while many people are KJV onlyists, I don't like the KJV in this way because they use the word unicorns. And that's why, one reason why I don't believe it's your best and perfect translation that some of you lift highly today. It's a great translation. I like the King James, but it's not perfect, with terminology. In verse 8 through 10, it says, "For it is the day of the Lord's vengeance, the year of recompense for the cause of Zion. Its streams shall be turned into pitch, and its dust into brimstone. Its land shall become burning pitch. It shall not be quenched night or day. Its smoke shall ascend forever. From generation to generation it shall lie waste. No one shall pass through it forever and ever." So God's day of vengeance on Edom will be the same as on the rest of the nations, as seen in Isaiah 59 verse 17 and 18, Isaiah 61 verse 2, Isaiah 63 verse 4. And the day of the Lord is when the Lord establishes his kingdom on earth by delivering and glorifying his saints, as well as by punishing the wicked and the oppressors of his children. And Sodom is described just like verse 9 in similar terms with the brimstone and burning pitch, as you can find back in Genesis 19 verse 24 and Genesis 19 verse 28. And for those who love their pride this month, Sodom and Gomorrah is a place for you to look to. It is not a thing that God's going to honor. And burning fire is a common image in the Bible for the enduring fate of the wicked. And God's judgment is to reduce the nations to a state of perpetual volcanic waste. And we see that God's judgment is everlasting, as we'll discuss more in our wrap-up. But Isaiah chapter 66 verse 24 also shows it. And in the day of the Lord's vengeance, ecology will be unfixable, that's for sure, for the environmentalists that think they're going to save the world. And verse 11 through 15 says, "But the pelican and the porcupine shall possess it, and the owl and the raven shall dwell in it, and he shall stretch out over it the line of confusion and the stones of emptiness. They shall call its nobles to the kingdom, but none shall be there, and all its princes shall be nothing. And thorns shall come up in its palaces, and nettles and brambles in its fortresses. It shall be an habitation of jackals, a courtyard for ostriches. The wild beasts of the desert shall also meet with the jackals, and the wild goat shall bleat to its companion. Also the night creature shall rest there, and find herself a place of rest. And there the arrow snake shall make her nest and lay eggs, and hatch and gather them under her shadow. There shall be the hawks be gathered, every one of her mate." So the various forms of animal and birds life symbolizes the depopulated condition in which the nations fall under the judgment of God upon them. And the presence of unclean birds was a sign of desolation and wilderness. And similar symbolism portrays the final state of Babylon in the future as well that way, and we're going to look at that in our wrap-up. And the land will be empty of life except for a few birds. And I know I've discussed the plumb line before. It was often used in construction projects, but it was also used for the demolition that preceded such new beginnings. And in verse 13, we see the thorns, the nettles, and the thistles. They are all aspects of the covenant curse. In verse 14, the night bird likely refers to the owl. And I'm going to be mentioning something about these birds, the significance in Jewish mythology. And interestingly, talking about the owl, I actually was driving late Friday night last week, like after 11 o'clock at night. And I've never seen an owl in the wild before. I've seen them many times in, zoo or park type environments. I've never seen one in the wild. So I'm driving up this road and I see this thing just standing in the middle of the lane as I turned onto the street. I came to a stop because I don't really want to hit wildlife if I'm not going to cause an accident or something more severe. So this thing, I'm looking down at it in my headlights and I'm like, that's an owl. It was just sitting in the road staring at my headlights. And unfortunately, I wasn't able to get a picture of it because my phone has a drive-in feature, don't disturb while driving, and I wasn't able to get out of that in time before it flew away about 30 seconds after. But it was pretty cool. I looked it up. It looked like a barn owl. So, as mentioned before, the King James Version goes with wild goat to be Satyr, which was a mythico-demonic creature. And it's possible, one way that the King James Version might be good, is it's possible Isaiah is saying that the wild goats are symbolic, that it would be demons that inhabited the desolate regions of Edom, or he may mean that it will be the haunt of the demonic spirits. Or Isaiah is saying wild goats would inhabit the desolate regions of Edom, or it will be haunted by demonic spirits. And theologian Harry Botima held to the translation here of the demons. And the Hebrew word for night creature is Lilith, and its feminine form of night. And old Jewish superstitions make Lilith a person who was a beautiful demon of the night who seduced children and men, killed children and seduced men. And it's possible Isaiah is using the term to describe the demonic habitation of Edom after God's judgment. In verse 16-17, says, search from the book of the Lord and read. Not one of these shall fail, nor not one shall lack her mate. For my mouth has commanded it, and his spirit has gathered them. He has cast a lot for them, and his hand has divided it among them with a measuring line. They shall possess it forever. From generation to generation they shall dwell in it. So the prophecies against the nation of in the first 15 verses were just as certain as God's sovereign control command through his prophet. And in verse 17, God had partitioned off Edom just as he had once did in Canaan in Numbers 26 verse 55 through 56, Joshua 18 verse 4 through 6, and allotted it to the wild animals listed in verse 11 through 15. And as God distributed the promised land by lot in Joshua 18:10, so has he divided Edom against the unclean animals. And even seemingly random events in history are under the Lord's control. And verse 16 is a remarkable statement from Isaiah that these were the Lord's words, and for readers to look it up once prophecy is fulfilled. And the time of great tribulation is a coming certainty upon the earth. There's no doubt about it. I believe there will be a great tribulation at the end of times. And it's not our job to bring it, and it's not our job to prevent it. But we must be ready. And I want to go over to Luke 21, verse 36. And I forgot my water bottle, and I'm recording this before the worst of the heat wave starts hitting for day 2 today. So my mouth's a little bit dry. But Luke 21:36 says, "Watch therefore and pray always, that you may be counted worthy to escape all these things that will come to pass, and to stand before the Son of Man." So we should be in prayer. We should be watchful as the times grow closer. And so our wrap up tonight, we look at the indignation of the Lord against the people of the nations. And we see the fury and the completeness of the Lord's judgment. And I want to go over to the book of Revelation chapter 6, verse 8. And as I mentioned before, my friend Brian Peckham's doing a full study on Facebook every Monday and Tuesday on the book of Revelation. So feel free to check him out if you are looking for a expository approach to the book of Revelation within the premillennial viewpoint. And Revelation chapter 6 verse 8 says, "So I looked, and behold, a pale horse, and the name of him who sat on it was Death, and Hades followed with him. And power was given to them over a fourth of the earth, to kill with the sword, with hunger, with death, and by the beasts of the earth. When he opened the fifth seal, I saw under the altar the souls of those who had been slain for the word of God and for the testimony which they held. And they cried with a loud voice, saying, How long, O Lord, holy and true, until you judge and avenge our blood on those who dwell on the earth? Then a white robe was given to each of them, and it was said to them that they should rest a little while longer, until both the number of their fellow servants and their brethren who would be killed as they were was completed. I looked when he opened the sixth seal, and behold, there was a great earthquake, and the sun became dark as sackcloth of hair, and the moon became like blood, and the stars of heaven fell to the earth as the fig tree drops its late figs when it was shaken by a mighty wind. Then the sky receded as a scroll when it is rolled up." Remember those words back in Isaiah? "And every mountain and island was moved out of its place. And the kings of the earth, the great men, the rich men, the commanders, the mighty men, every slave and every free man, hid themselves in the caves and in the rocks of the mountains, and said to the mountains and rocks, Fall on us, hide us from the face of him who sits on the throne, and from the wrath of the Lamb. For the great day of his wrath has come, and who is able to stand it?" So what a horrible description we see, horrific time that the Great Tribulation will be. It is something you would not want to have to experience. And we see that it's going to involve widespread ecological, economical, cosmic, and human catastrophe on a level never known before in history. It will be history making. And then we see in verse 4 in Revelation chapter 6, as I mentioned. In verse 5 through 7 of Isaiah 34 shows the great bloodshed at the judgment of the Lord. And sorry, Democrats, this is not going to be a different word here, a bloodshed. I know it's a very offensive word to you. And I know that you guys like to take the presidential candidate Trump's words speaking on the economy and take that one word and run with it. This is actual bloodbath. There's going to be very graphic and bloody and gruesome in the Great Tribulation. And I want to go over to Revelation chapter 14, verse 19. Revelation chapter 14, verse 19 and 20. "So the angel thrust his sickle into the earth, and gathered the vine of the earth, and threw it into the great winepress of the wrath of God. And the winepress was trampled outside the city, and blood came out of the winepress up to the horses' bridles, for 1,600 furlongs." So what a horrific, bloody affair in the Battle of Armageddon. And as mentioned before, as I mentioned earlier in the video, Brian Peckham is doing a video through the book of Revelation. And verse 8 to 10 of Isaiah 34 shows the indignation of the Lord against the land of the nations as the land is made desolate. In Revelation chapters 8 and chapter 16, they show us that 1/3 of the earth's vegetation, the oceans, the fresh waters, are going to be all polluted, destroyed, and unusable. In Revelation chapter 14, verse 9 through 11, says, Then a third angel followed them, saying with a loud voice, If anyone worships the beast in his image and receives the mark on his forehead or on his hand, he himself shall also drink of the wine of the wrath of God, which is poured out in full strength into the cup of his indignation. And he shall be tormented with fire and brimstone in the presence of the holy angels, in the presence of the Lamb. And the smoke of their torment transcends forever and ever, and they have no rest day and night, who worship the beast and his image, and whoever receives the mark of his name. So, once again, the terminology here in these verses reminds me of Sodom and Gomorrah. And this is the destiny of the final Babylon, the great end-time world empire, or what will be more known as the United Nations, aka world system. And speaking in verse 10, God's judgment is everlasting. Now I want to go over to Mark chapter 9, verse 43 through 48, where it says, If your hand causes you to sin, cut it off. It is better for you to enter into life maimed rather than having two hands to go to hell, into the fire that shall never be quenched, where the worm does not die and the fire is not quenched. And if your foot causes you to sin, cut it off. It is better for you to enter life lame than having 2 feet to be cast into hell, into the fire that shall never be quenched, where their worm does not die and the fire is not quenched. And if your eye causes you to sin, pluck it out. It is better for you to enter the kingdom of God with one eye rather than having 2 eyes to be cast into the hellfire, where the worm does not die and the fire is not quenched. So we see in Mark chapter 9, verse 43 through 48, we see that hell is eternal. The lake of fire is going to be eternal when hell is thrown into it. And this heat wave and humidity that over hundreds of millions are experiencing right now in the U.S., it is going to be as nothing compared to the eternal state. And I want to go back to Revelation chapter 18, verse 2. Revelation 18:2 says, And he cried mightily with a loud voice, saying, Babylon the great is fallen, and has become a dwelling place of demons, a prison for every foul spirit, and a cage for every unclean and hated bird. So the bird symbolism carries into the final state of Babylon spoken about in Revelation 18, verse 2 in the future. And I thought that was interesting, going from Isaiah into Revelation. In Isaiah 34, verse 11 through 15, shows that the land is inhabited only by animals of the wilderness. And we see the chapter ends with the surety of the judgments of the Lord, that this isn't just a fable. This is going to happen. And you can be sure of that. So we'll see you next, as we'll be looking tomorrow at a topical Saturday, and it will be, I think, our 8th of the year. So we're going to see how many we do this year. I'm keeping track now because I never kept track before. So I hope you have a great weekend up ahead. I hope that you stayed cool through the worst of the heat wave this week if you are in the United States. Have a blessed weekend. We'll see you tomorrow.